At She Can, we tell women's stories. We show how women got to where they are today. And these women come from different walks of life and all over the world. And I'm really delighted to be talking to Claire Lowson today. Claire, welcome to She Can. You're the CEO and founder of Supermenopause. You are a campaigner, speaker, and advocate on rebranding age. You help senior women go from burnout to on fire. You work on attraction and retention. You're an executive coach, a leadership consultant, and you work on organizational resilience and longevity. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Okay, so I've got quite a mixed background in that I started in brand strategy. Well, I started as a teacher and then moved into brand strategy and eventually then into coaching. And I've kind of done a mix of all those things for many, many years. So I always think I had a portfolio career long before that was a thing, really. I know it is now. And my driving thread, I guess, through all of that was the kind of desire to optimize. So always even as a child, I wanted to optimize potential. I used to make my friends kind of run around the village and time them and see if I could get them faster or get them more energized. So that was the kind of thread running through, and I can see how that's informed all of my work. But now I'm at the point where I work mainly with women, not only with women, but mainly with women who are ambitious, driven, visionary, high achievers, but who either want to get somewhere further, faster, and stronger, or who, for a variety of reasons, and it often is around the kind of 45 plus, 45 to 50 age mark, have kind of come unstuck or got stuck and really looking to find their way back. And whilst at the moment I'm working with a lot of women individually or within their companies, the brand piece sits alongside that because I'm always interested in what's going on within the worlds that these women inhabit or that generally we inhabit. And the trend at the moment is, of course, that, we're seeing very clearly that whilst women are 50 plus are the fastest growing swathe of the workforce, fastest growing demographic in the workforce, they're also the kind of biggest exodus from the workforce. And that doesn't make any sense either for them or for the economy or for society. We have an aging population where we need to keep people in work for longer. And yet at the same time, we're pushing particularly women out. And women have already obviously dealing with the gender pay gap and have got a pension deficit. So for me, these things kind of coalesce around a bigger consultancy piece. So that's kind of where I sit. I might be working with the women individually. I might be working with the bigger picture within their organizations to look at what we can do. And generally, I'm interested in, kind of pushing out a bigger awareness, which I've always been interested in since I was young, of really wanting to rebrand age. I've never ever, even since being a child or a young person, understood why we really make youth the big thing, because none of us can stay there. Nobody can stay there. So it feels for me a completely futile thing for everyone to
It's a
make, like you have this kind of a peak at whenever it is. I don't know when it is. I mean, I don't think any of us would be able to define it because there never is a golden point. But some say peak at 25, maybe it's 30 now, and then a downward slide. I mean, that doesn't serve anybody any good. So that's the kind of, the really big picture that I'm kind of sitting in the midst of, I guess.
Claire, which is such an important space. And I think you've been talking about that. Women in sort of, if we can call it middle age, get burnouts, they leave companies in droves. And once you've actually, once they built their career up to a point where they're now getting to positions that are really of influence, which is sort of the tragedy within that. And so tell us a bit more what you do with your company, the Supermenopause, around those things, around those points where women are leaving companies in droves and where, menopause might hit. And, what does that mean for women and women in the workplace?
I think for me, my angle on that really depends whether I'm working with an organization or with a woman individually. If it's working with a woman individually who comes with a kind of burnout situation or very much at a point of pivot or change, then we would go from there. And many women leave big jobs, long, long loyalty with big organizations to set up on their own. And they're doing that because they've just had enough. They've had enough of being either overlooked, disrespected, put upon, all those things that can happen. Women take on more of the kind of pastoral care. They take on more of the diversity and inclusion kind of push as well. They are largely, and it's fair to say, running homes as well as big leadership positions at work. I know that's not always the case, but the statistics bear that out. And by this age, they'll often have, teenage children doing exams. Sometimes, often you'll get a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old in the same family. So the exam burden can be quite tough. We've got a teenage mental health kind of epidemic, and then we've got aging parents in the mix. So there's a lot going on for women at that point that might make them feel that staying in a job that isn't supportive, isn't really treating them well, isn't going to give them the future that they really want, is untenable, and they've just had enough and leave. And in that case, I would work with them to really kind of build them up from the base level. And I have a power framework that we work through, which is the P is perception, the O is that, and so it's the mindset piece. We then look at the opportunity, we look at the wiring, the kind of rewiring the brain to literally see a future and start to shape that future. The E is for energy. So for me, I absolutely hand on heart can say that I've got the same energy that I had when I was in my 20s. And I just have no concept that energy should dwindle as we age. So I think energy is key, and there's a lot we need to think about there in terms of, managing our physical health, blood sugar management, what we're eating, how we're moving. And then the R of power is the kind of reset, review, where realize. So that's a kind of path that I would, and then those women who've left big organizations may go into other roles. They do sometimes then decide to look for another role, but maybe in a smaller, they might go from client side to agency or into a smaller setup. Or they start their own thing. And a lot of them have got big ideas for starting their own thing. And the kind of success, that the upper tail growth of a firm founded by a 50 plus founder outstrips that of a 30 plus founder. So these people at this age are very capable of setting up and building successful businesses. Obviously, if I go into work within an organization, then you have to look at it a little bit differently. And what we always say there is that this isn't a women's issue. Women aren't broken. Women aren't leaving at this point because they're broken. The problem isn't with the women, it's with the organization typically. And that can be really unknown and ununderstood by even the best organization. It's rarely a deliberate thing. I mean, recently I was at an event in the States with over 100 women, and it was almost kind of euphoric to hear that delivered, that oh, hang on a minute, so it's not us, it's not our fault, it's not us that are not coping well enough. I think we run slightly ahead in the UK as well with menopause awareness and having that kind of in the mix. We're slightly ahead of Europe, and I'd say we're definitely ahead of America. So I kind of deal with this in slightly different ways according to where I am, but certainly in the States at the moment, I'd say there's a real recognition that women need more, that things become quite difficult, and that they need to play catch up a little bit. But in any organization, basically it's about recognizing the kind of economic factors. I would always say this is an FD issue. It's not an HR issue. It's not a women's issue. It's not a diversity inclusion issue. It's an FD issue, because we have an aging population. We have a dwindling kind of market into the workplace. And I think there's a stat that I couldn't quote where I got it from, but 12 million older people every year leave the workforce, and only 7 million are coming in. So the deficit that the deficit is showing that this is a looming economic crisis. Because the other thing, obviously, you touched on the fact at the beginning that I'm interested in the longevity piece. The indicators for longevity are connection, stimulation, and kind of, movement, getting out and about, and work, if it's the right work, delivers a lot of those things. So you can see how this starts to kind of join up and become quite a kind of virtuous circle. That the value of keeping people in work is many. It's kind of manifold. It runs around. I always say it's kind of a circle of live well, work well, and brand well. Because we can talk about the brand piece later, that brands largely ignore this level of the population as well. But when all those things are working well, and you've got a highly visible, very respected and very healthy and active older population, that is win-win-win for everybody. For everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's paramount for the way forward. And you've given all the data, which is great, Claire. I'm so thankful for that. Claire, so you obviously coach groups and individuals, and you are really trying to make a difference in this space. What is your main motivator?
I think it's this sense of optimize. I've just always had this kind of driver to optimize, and as I say, it's never made sense that we kind of prioritize youth when youth's transient for everybody, and none of us want to die young, and yet none of us want to grow old. So that's a nonsense. We have to change that, and if we change that, everything changes. And actually, it's a new-ish construct. The baby boomers were the first generation to become the kind of cool teenagers. The teenager, even that word was coined then. It wasn't always the case that youth was completely idolized and seen as the kind of best place to be. And I think, in fact, yeah, so I guess there's that. And then that naturally throws you into a place where if youth's great, then age is rubbish. And it just makes no sense. And we all know the value of age. We all know that, whether we're children looking to our parents and grandparents who give us so much, or whether we are older people who completely know that we've got a valid voice. We also, all of us know, I mean, whether you're, 30 or 20, you definitely feel stronger than you did 5 years ago. We all know that with age comes experience and a kind of self-awareness and confidence. So I think it's really, it's a kind of social construct that youth is best, and it just doesn't serve us at the moment. And ironically, the baby boomers were the guys who kind of pushed for recognition of their value as teenagers, and now they're the ones who need to be recognized at older age too. And so, and I think, so many of the kind of things that we take as given are not. Like retirement is an artificial construct. If you didn't, before the Industrial Revolution, people just worked to live. And if you look at countries now, like the Blue Zone countries, Sicily, Greece, some parts of America, but mainly the kind of those European Blue Zones, they're very active in growing their own food still. Japan too. Yeah. They would work later in life, but I wouldn't see it as work. It's just the natural sustenance, the beauty of living like that, eating from your own produce, growing fresh food. So I think we've got, since the Industrial Revolution, we have this kind of idea, you get a job, you work that job, and you work really hard because, you're just saving up for your retirement, and then you retire. And actually the statistics show that there is a bit of a retire and die phenomenon because people lose their identity and everything. So actually, even that construct of retirement, well, it is a construct, and I don't think it necessarily serves us that well anymore. I appreciate, depending on what your work is, there's a difference. Hard labor is not something anybody wants to continue doing forever. But I'm interested in looking at innovating around this whole area, how we have more kind of flexible retirement paths where you don't retire, but you have a lot more flexibility. There's lots of work in this area. I've got a friend who's very kind of clued up on all of this, looking at, intergenerational work workplaces, intergenerational job shares, because Gen Z typically want more flex now, and they don't all want full-time work, and neither does an older person.
Yeah.
So ways of building in a more kind of work-life balance mentality to the whole workforce, which will enable us to have 5 generations at work.
Yeah.
And
Which is
I think when I read, there's a book that I read very, very young, which you may well know, Napoleon Hill, Think and Get Rich. I don't know if you know that book. It was written in the 20s. It's very kind of chauvinist because it was of the time when it was written. But I did a lot of mindset work in my kind of late 20s, and that book was one of the ones that I read. But I reread that recently, an unabridged version, because I think a lot of the ones that you get now are abridged. And he talks in there about the power of the mind and the power of the mind to produce everything that we need when we're able to access it fully. But in that book, written before the kind of baby boom, he was saying you can't really expect to be able to do this well until your 40s. You'll definitely be able to do it better in your 50s, and you're probably not really going to be at the peak of this ability until your 60s and beyond, which is really interesting. That book was written in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And yet now we're in an age where we just ignore all of that and somehow think that everything happens, when we're much younger. So yeah, I guess that's my kind of driver. It's just been this all of life kind of thing about making all of life work instead of just a part of it.
Claire, and I couldn't resonate more with all of this because I think that we as a society, we cannot afford to send people into retirement anymore so early. And I also feel that then you lose your purpose, and people really struggle with that. So it's a lot around purpose and how to restructure that and how to somehow organize the workforce with more diversity, because at the end of the day, diversity also means people of different ages, different genders, different backgrounds, and all of that plays into making a workplace better and also better bottom line. And that we now know that data shows the more diverse with all of those different aspects, the more successful a company is. Claire, so what qualities do you bring to the table or have acquired over the years that really serve you in what you do now?
I think the mindset. I have always been interested in the working of the mind, but I had a kind of trauma, childhood trauma that was little understood really at the time. It became a phobia. So I had hypnotherapy very early. I mean, it's a much bigger thing now than it was then. And it was a real challenge for me. It was a phobia about going away from home. So it made life quite difficult as a teenager and certainly going to university. But I always believed that you can lever whatever challenges we get are levers to kind of build from. And so for me, that was it threw up this interest in the mind. And I've also always done yoga. My mum did yoga, so I did yoga from being a child. And there's obviously, you start to see the parallels between hypnotherapy, meditation. And then when I quite young, I worked at a very brilliant, lovely kind of life-shaping agency called Imagination in London, where I learned a lot. We built a fantastic network even that still stays today. And Imagination sent me on a course called Mindstorm, that was a really early course about, I mean, now people talk about manifesting. It didn't talk about manifesting, but it was talking about right brain thinking and the capacity to shape the world according to the way we see it and believe in it and program our mind. And that really appealed to me because, again, it played into kind of meditation and hypnotherapy. So for me, I can't even remember what your question was now. I guess
qualities,
it's been that kind of interest in how we can own our own future, and at the same time aware that I've kind of come into that through my own kind of psyche that can sometimes not unravel, but definitely be in the mix as a kind of putting the brakes on. And so I've always been interested in mental health, really, and the kind of where that, I mean, that's the optimizing thing again, where mental and physical health come together. So I was a teacher when I first left university, and I only did it for about 4 or 5 years, and I was very young. But all of the girls would come and share their problems. I mean, largely because I was young. They were, kind of 14 to 18, and I was only in my early 20s. But it just has always been a thing, even at university, that people would come and talk to me and open up to me and share their problems. And it plays back to the thing about optimizing. I've always been interested in kind of helping people work through that. And I think naturally it's in my temperament to want to kind of inspire and energize and lift people up and just a natural kind of optimism and seeing a better future. I'm just there's nothing of the cynic in me, really. Well, there are some things I'm a bit cynical about. School system. I mean, there are things I get quite cynical about, but I'm generally, my mindset is not that. It's much more about be the change. I know it's a cliche, but be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, which I love to hear, Claire, because I think cynicism hasn't got a place in the world anymore because nothing will ever change.
Yeah.
Claire, so give us some top tips. You've worked with women for a very long time. What tips would you give women that maybe feel right now, gosh, I think I'm not sure I've got anything left to give, or maybe I'm too old now, or maybe I'm a bit burnt out. What do you tell these women?
I think for me, I've always felt that like you have to see life as always an upward trajectory, because otherwise, why do you get up in the morning? I don't think it's ever healthy to think the best is behind me. So, I think you have to see it as an upward trajectory, and you have to work yourself to work out what that looks like. And there's a danger that at a certain point we stop doing that. So when we're in our 20s, we might visualize a future where we've got a great career, we've got a couple of children, we've got a partner. We can visualize that. And then when we've got the young children, we might visualize when we're able to get a bit more freedom and have nice holidays again, or whatever it is, take the children on bigger adventures. And then suddenly it kind of falls away and people seem to stop being able to visualize anything ahead. And in Japan, where they have they're more kind of on it with the aging population, they do a quite interesting exercise that I use quite often. I got it from Japan, where they do these kind of council run projects, putting people on these courses where they get you to draw your life. You draw your life, you put in your kind of milestones to date, and you'll draw up to what you think life looks like. And a lot of people will go to around 70, 75. And you look at it and you're like, well, yeah. So they'll say, well, so for the next few years, I'll be gardening, seeing my grandchildren, or whatever. And then you say, okay, now draw that line to 100. So they draw the line to 100, and it's quite long. If you've got it to 75 and you're drawing it to 100, and then, well, what are you doing there? What's going to be in that line? And that, I think, is the really interesting point, that we just don't have enough of a blueprint about what that later piece looks like. And that again is a social construct, because there aren't brands showing us what that looks like. Brands typically show us young people doing everything, even though they're things that are definitely going to be more in the domain of older people. They show young people doing it. So I was on a flight recently to the States with work, and this advert kept looping over and over. I think it was Malibu Beach Resort, but it might not have been, but I think it was. And it was a very bland, it was a beach, a hotel room, a restaurant, kind of, and this young couple inhabiting the beach, the hotel room, the restaurant, and a young black woman and a white young man, and they were a couple, and she had was skipping around in a bikini and a sundress, and they inhabited this incredibly bland place, which made no sense at all. So I was like, well, what is there that would take a young couple there? There's not water sports, there's not a club, there's nothing there that felt like it was in the vibe of a young couple. There weren't any children, so it wasn't a family place. So presumably it was a more mellow kind of, even for an older older couple in the mix, it needed a bit more kind of clarity. But from a brand perspective, that was a complete fail. It was an incredibly dull advert, and it was all wrong because they had, they were it kind of just didn't fit together. And this is what I think brands do. They kind of panic and think we've got to show young people doing all these things because they're the lifetime customers that we want. And they're ignoring those people who have got disposable income and time and actually want to carry on doing the things that they've always loved. So I think for all of us, it's quite hard to have role models of what a healthy, active, vibrant, great future life looks like. And we need those role models, specifically women. I mean, men have got, there's always been powerful older men in the public domain. But of course, women have all been kind of fired by then, taken off TV shows and, put off reading the news and pensioned off early because they don't look young anymore. And so who are we left with? We've got kind of Judi Dench and Helen Mirren, who are constantly trotted out as the kind of icons of women. But we need, and it's the same with kind of your like health goals, or like we look in the mirror and we see us, and then we've got some kind of societal expectation of what 70 looks like, which might be some rather kind of matronly grey-haired grandma on a magazine cover. But that's not aspirational at all. And there are loads of people who are living really fit, active, healthy lives. I've got a great friend who turned 70 this year. We met on a yoga retreat probably 25 years ago. And I saw a photo of her recently, just when I was scrolling looking for something of her around her 60th birthday. She looks infinitely fitter and healthier now at 70 than she was then. She'd been working then at IBM. Now she's doing hot yoga every day. She's, walking miles. She's got a bit more time. So I think we need to see all that in the public domain, and we need brands to recognize their role in making society more kind of age aspirational.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Such a circle.
Yeah. I mean, we have a few examples now, but they also get paraded the whole time. That's so true. And I love that Reese Witherspoon set up a production company where they are showing older women and just women in general, which is already great, and women-centric stories. And there are people who are making a real difference and make money with it, which is the important example, right? She made, I think, $1 billion with her production company, Hello Sunshine. So I think, and there are, the fact that we are still talking about this and have to talk about it in 2024 is somewhat sad. But the book The Idea of You that came out, where there's an older woman who has an affair with a younger rock star, and that's been made into a film, and Anne Hathaway is the star, and she's been talking about it now for I think 6 months, of how women get portrayed always in the same way. The women that are so good, who are the caretakers or the mothers, and they're not really allowed to occupy other spaces. And I think that also flows into this ageism that we still see all the time, and brands that cannot embrace different ages, or different backgrounds and different looks and all of those things, where there's so much work to do. Claire, so who are your role models? Who are the people who really motivate and inspire you to keep going with this important message that you are putting out into the world?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Gosh, I don't really know. I have there are people in this space. Aviva Wittenberg Cox does a lot of work around the longevity piece. She's brilliant. She writes for Forbes. She has a very good kind of Substack on this. So I follow her kind of writing. I guess it's a good question. There are lots of people in the longevity space that I've been quite interested in, and I've kind of slightly lost my way with. They are largely white American men. And become quite kind of, supplement focused and treatment focused, and too much, just too much. Yeah. I think we want a simpler, healthier take on it than that. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure about role models. I think that's a really good question. You know, and for me, I guess I don't really use Instagram very much, but I like it if I'm just scrolling through and I'll stumble upon somebody who looks interesting, like they're doing something interesting at age, but I'm not necessarily following them. So yeah, that's a really, I don't know. I think the problem is that there aren't necessarily role models. And for me, I had my children very late, in my late 40s, late 40s. So I'm going to be a very old mum of adults. And I think, you know, somebody once said to me that, you know, the beauty of your children, the real joy with your children is the adult relationship that you have. And for me, obviously, that's quite poignant because it's going to come later. And my daughter, when she turned 5, looked at me and said, Mummy, just think when I'm your age, how long my legs will be and how long my hair will be. Because in her mind, you just keep on growing bigger and better every year. But it was quite painful because I thought, oh my God, when you know, when she's my age, will I even be here still? Will I know her? And that was really brilliant because that made me then have a really big kind of leap in terms of, well, what will I be living like then? What will I look like? What will my life look like? What will I feel like? And so then, because I'm a big believer in the power of visualization and how we can think ourselves into the reality we want, that meant that I started to spend time really visualizing myself kind of at 80 and 90, even 100. I was telling someone recently, we were laughing about me being 100 and zipping around London, going to the theatre, going for dinner, then the theatre with my children, and then back to some, you know, my pied-à-terre in London. So I think it's that kind of, it's that really that keeps me going. It's kind of creating myself as a role model, the future me, I guess.
Yeah.
And in a way that does challenge, because convention pushes so hard against that it's dangerous.
What are your future plans and the goals? What is coming up for you in the next couple of years?
For me, I think it's really to deepen the consultancy offer. I think it is to really get to work to get some of those big businesses on board to understand the value of this marketplace commercially. So the kind of live well, work well, brand well, whether you think of that as a Venn diagram or a kind of circle, is where I'm interested in being, because I think that we want people to invest in their health. We want quality later life. At the moment, we've got the biggest percentage of the population living the biggest percentage of their life in poor health.
Yeah.
So because they're living longer and they're going on to, you know, they've got type 2 diabetes or they're going on to statins or whatever is happening, mobility is reduced at 40 plus, 40, 50. Certainly now in the UK, it seems a standard to put somebody onto statins in their 40s, which is, that's a long time to be on medication. So people are having the biggest chunk of their life in poor health. And we want to flip that, because healthy, contributing older age will only come with better wellness. So there's a live well piece. And I think that can be owned by organizations who invest in the well-being of their people. And the work well piece then is also keeping, you know, having the kind of mindset of recruiting older people, retaining older people, looking at intergenerational benefits, how we kind of lift up Gen Z and the younger people coming through as well. And then the brand well piece is huge, really, in terms of, like we've said, making sure that businesses are putting older people out there and showing everybody what it is to be fit and healthy and active. And that's not age isn't the kind of segment. It's not the market segment, isn't age. It's lifestyle. We're still interested in the same things we always were. We just don't appear on the adverts anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's not about seeing that we're now going to have a load of advertising that is for older people. It's not that at all. It's a more inclusive way of keeping your messaging alive. And I think at the moment, people brands target younger audiences because they want this kind of lifetime loyalty, but in truth, they're losing a whole load of consumers who they could retain for another 20 years.
Yeah.
So whether you're looking at fashion, or I had a conversation with somebody the other day, it was like, it's not even just fashion, is it? It's yogurt, it's anything. None of those products are targeted at older people. And yet, we know that women over 50 are super consumers. Forbes call them super consumers, with a 97% purchasing power for the household. They're buying, women of that age are buying holidays and cars and houses, and their wardrobes for their teenage children and their partner, all the household things. So it needs to be much more kind of joined up, I think.
Yeah, I
So
completely.
I think that's really, a kind of consultancy that wouldn't be Supermenopause, because Supermenopause has been, I mean, I haven't really built that brand lately because I think I quite quickly moved on from being purely menopause. For me, it was Supermenopause was about trying to get women to see that this isn't a bad thing, it's a lever. But increasingly over the years, I've worked with younger and younger women. I've been working with women in their early 40s where the menopause thing isn't so prevalent, but the burnout is.
Yeah.
And then I think now, it's really looking at a consultancy that's much more about all of life advertising, marketing, and strategic consultancy for businesses who need to change. And that is with the aging population as the backdrop.
Claire, I'm so inspired by this conversation. Thank you for giving me so much time, for telling your story and saying so many important things of what we see out in the world today that needs to be changed. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Lovely to do it.